Good evening, everyone. My name is Shirney Boteach, and I am in a unique position to welcome all of you on behalf of both This World, the Jewish Values Network, who organized this evening's event, as well as Yeshiva University, who so graciously is hosting it. Tonight, we are so honored to be joined by three global leaders. Here to introduce them is my father and the moderator of tonight's event, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach.
First and foremost, the #1 philanthropist, Jewish philanthropist in the entire world, and one of the foremost Jewish philanthropists of all time, and a couple whose very name has become synonymous with Jewish identity, support for the State of Israel, and Jewish pride, Mr. Sheldon Adelson. To my right, my very dear friend, who went to become the foreign affairs columnist for the Wall Street Journal, which he currently is, as well as deputy editorial page editor of the Wall Street Journal. And for those of us who know and love Brett and who have been his friends for many years, we were so proud when in 2013, just a few months back, he won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. Ladies and gentlemen, Brett Stevens. Before Richard Joel became the president of Yeshiva University, he was the international head of Hillel. He is widely credited with having revolutionized Hillel and revamped its programming. He instilled Jewish pride. His whole program of getting kids just to do Jewish became something legendary on campuses. And it was largely because of his phenomenal success heading Hillels across the nation that he was chosen to become the 4th president of Yeshiva University. Ladies and gentlemen, our host this evening is Dr. Richard Joel. Thank you. The question of will Jews exist with an existential threat against the State of Israel in the form of Iran and a nuclear weapon being developed, whether it's a uranium weapon, a plutonium weapon, and with assimilation being so rampant in the United States, and with that devastating, catastrophic Pew Research poll that just came out that seemed to indicate that with the exception of the Orthodox community, American Jewry are slowly disappearing. This is meant to be an intimate conversation because of how important the subject is, existential threat facing the Jewish people physically from Iran and other terrorist threats against Israel, and the existential threat of assimilation. I'm asking the speakers to be very candid. There's a lot of press here. There's friendly press. There's press that may not be as friendly. We want this to be an open forum. They're all here, and the public is here, but we're going to have a dialogue which is candid and honest, that is not tailored to suit any particular audience. I have no intention, I should say, of being an impartial moderator. People read my columns. They know that I have strong views on certain subjects, and I hope to challenge all the people on this panel because of how important the subject is. Yes, you will discover that, Sheldon. Okay, so you have to be ready. So let me immediately begin with you, Brett. You are recognized by many as one of the foremost defenders of Israel in the English language. Some consider you to be the best current defender of Israel in the English language from a very important perch at the Wall Street Journal.
I'm better in Spanish.
Well, you were raised in Mexico City. You recently wrote a column that upset a lot of people. You said that Ehud Olmert should really be the prime minister of Israel right now, not Benjamin Netanyahu, because Netanyahu, you said, was all hat and no cattle. He talks a big talk. You predicted that he would go to the UN and say yet again, I'm laying down a line, we're going to attack Iran, we may have to act alone. You said Olmert actually did it with Syria's nuclear facilities. The next morning, the prime minister of Israel saw you, kind of joked with you a little bit about it. But were you serious about the article? Do you really think that Benjamin Netanyahu is not ready to strike Iran amidst this existential threat that they pose to Israel's continuity?
Well, look, I hope for the best, which is to say that I hope that he means what he says and is prepared to act if he needs to. I fear that Israel has walked itself into a corner by spending too much time trying to placate the United States rather than look after its security interests. There are a few speakers in Israel's history who are more convincing and compelling than Benjamin Netanyahu, but if you look at his record, he's a very cautious and often very tactical politician. And I fear that the record of his, I guess now he's in his third term, but really the last 4 years, is that a lot of energy has been spent trying to get right with the Obama administration on the theory that the Obama administration, or President Obama, meant what he said when he told Jeffrey Goldberg, the journalist last year, that I, as the President of the United States, do not bluff. I will not allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been following what's happening in Syria, or vis-a-vis Syria in the last 2 months, you know perfectly well that this president does bluff, and that the state of Israel should be thinking very carefully about how credible U.S. assurances are. Let me put it to you in another way. If you've been following the news, and if you looked at the front page of the Wall Street Journal, one of the most interesting stories is to see the despair that our dear friends the Saudis have when it comes to Obama's seriousness with arming the moderate opposition, hopefully semi-moderate opposition, comparatively moderate opposition, in fighting the Assad regime in Syria. In May or June, I was on a conference call with Deputy National Security Advisor Benjamin Rhodes when he talked about how the administration was now committed to moving materiel to these rebels. Well, months later, it turns out they haven't moved anything, or they've moved de minimis amounts of equipment. So the Saudis are despairing of the credibility of American security guarantees. The Poles and the Czechs despaired of the credibility of those guarantees when the Obama administration pulled the carpet out from under them in 2009 on ballistic missile defense. This is a regime, or this is an administration that was honestly, I don't mean to say a regime. I do not consider this a regime. This is an administration.
So that was not a Freudian slip.
It might have been Freudian, but I'm unaware of it. This is an administration that goes out of its way to appease its enemies and does not think carefully about the harm it's doing to traditional American friendships and alliances around the world. So to get back to your question, the government of Israel, whatever your appraisal is of Benjamin Netanyahu's character or his fortitude, the government of Israel has to be seized with the fact that no more important issue confronts it than the prospect, an imminent prospect, of a nuclear Iran. That the consequences of an Israeli military strike might be serious for Israel, and no military strike in history has taken place without some forms of unintended consequences. But the perfectly foreseeable consequences of an Iran with nuclear weapons is a catastrophe for the state of Israel, and by the way, a catastrophe for the United States as well. And that is what we need to think about. You know, more than once in history.
So were you prodding him?
One last point. More than once in the last 60 years, it has been Israel that has saved the United States from foreign policy disasters, and Americans ought to recognize that. In 1981, against the objections of the Reagan administration, Israel did what had to be done to stop Iraq from gaining a nuclear weapon. And it was only 10 years later that then Defense Secretary Dick Cheney recognized what a contribution that Israel made to Western security then. We're coming up on that moment now. Was I trying to goad Bibi Netanyahu? Yes, I was, and I succeeded.
Okay, so that's why you wrote the column. You wrote the column because you were trying to push the prime minister to strike?
I was trying to push the prime minister to understand that that the state of Israel does not exist to ask the government of the United States for permission to do what's in its core national security interest.
Brett Stevens. That is quite a statement, my gosh. Brett is very passionate about this. Believes Iran is a true threat. His columns reflect that. His comments tonight, which are very forceful, reflect that. Now, you have a bully pulpit to the world because you spend a lot of money on politics. You spend a lot of money on philanthropy, and you're a very prominent businessman. You spoke at an event in Las Vegas where I heard you say that you were very disappointed in the actions of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and not doing enough to prevent the Holocaust. He won the war, but he could have done more, and historians, many historians agree with you.
He could have prevented the Holocaust.
You believe he could have prevented the Holocaust?
Yes.
How could he have prevented the Holocaust?
If not have prevented the Holocaust, he could have at least significantly reduced the severity of the Holocaust by not persuading the Brits, when he had the leverage, unlimited leverage over the UK, to open the door to Palestine. All he had to do was convince them that it was more important for them and their future by saying, look, one day America will become less isolationist, and you're going to turn to me and ask me to join the war, which you're already doing, but I can't do it now because Americans are far too isolationist. It'll be easy for me if you take the step of being humanitarian and not closing the door to the state of Palestine that time. So just don't sign the white paper, which limited the
Jewish immigration
to Palestine at first to 50,000 forever over a 5-year period. And it was subsequently changed to 75,000. So it's 15,000 a year for 5 years, forever. Now, had he made that phone call, I don't know what the result could have been, but I suspect, having negotiated for 68 years in business, that he really had the leverage, he really had the upper hand, and that he could have convinced Chamberlain, or whoever was the prime minister at the time, don't sign the white paper. By the way, it's not only him, it was a Democratic administration.
Okay, but...
I know there's a lot of Democrats in here, and I want to tell you something you probably don't know. I'm a Republican.
Well, I just learned something
formerly
new.
a Democrat because I didn't know better.
Well, I just learned something new, that you're a Republican, Sheldon. But let's be fair, and we'll do another event about this because I want to delve more deeply into it. But at the time, the Republican Party was even more isolationist than the Democrats. They really didn't want any kind of foreign intervention, and parties sometimes change when it comes to what they believe should be. What we saw the Republican Party support the war in Iraq. Now we saw a lot of Republicans who were even opposed to a strike against Syria after the gassing of children. But be that as it may, given your strong feelings about what the United States did not do to prevent the Holocaust, what are your feelings about President Obama outside of political? I'm not asking this as a political question or the fact that you supported candidates who opposed him. What is your feeling about Obama speaking to Iran right now and having diplomatic relations with Iran, picking up the phone to President Rouhani, while Iran still has yet to repudiate the genocidal statements of his predecessor, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad? Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has yet to repudiate his own genocidal statements about Israel. As recently as this March, he said he would wipe Haifa and Tel Aviv off the map. Last November, he said that Israel is a scab that must be removed. What are your feelings about the United States, just as an American, as a prominent American, speaking to Iran while those threats still exist?
The worst negotiating tactic I could ever imagine in my entire life.
Why is that?
Because you can't get anything from him. He's not saying to them, roll back your entire program and show that you're willing to be peaceful. So roll it all back if that's what you're going to end up with. We'll roll back the sanctions. So what is it, a game of chicken? Who's gonna blink first? It's very simple. It's the same thing with the Palestinians. 65 years, they haven't taken 1 millimeter step toward the Israelis to accommodate the needs of the Israelis, but more importantly, to show they truly want peace. I mean, if they truly want peace, it's very simple to say to all their henchmen, lay off the terrorism for 5 years. And they'll come to the Jews and say, for 5 or 10 years, there'll be no terrorism, there'll be no violence or no incitement against. We'll throw out the books to teach the 3-year-old children that Jews are descended from swine and apes, and that we're not going to teach anymore in their curriculum to kill the Jews, that the Jews are very bad people. So if you really want peace, it's very simple to send a message to your opposition. Just be peaceful. open up all the things. It said, oh, we'll give you this if you give us something. I think it's the worst negotiating ploy tactic anybody could imagine.
Right, so you would support negotiations with Iran currently so long as they first seized all enrichment of uranium?
No. What do you mean support negotiation? What are we going to negotiate about? What I would say is, listen, you see that desert out there? I want to show you something. So you pick up your cell phone, even at traveling rates. You pick up your cell phone, and what are they called?
Roaming charges.
Roaming charges. You pick up your cell phone and you call somewhere in Nebraska and you say, okay, let it go. So there's an atomic weapon goes over ballistic missiles in the middle of the desert that doesn't hurt a soul. Maybe a couple of rattlesnakes and scorpions or whatever. And then you say, see, the next one is in the middle of Tehran. So we mean business. You want to be wiped out? Go ahead and take a tough position and continue with your nuclear development. You want to be peaceful? You want to be peaceful? Just reverse it all, and we will guarantee you that you can have a nuclear power plant for electricity purposes, for energy purposes. That's all.
So a tremendous demonstration of American strength, so that they would get the
The
message.
only thing they understand.
And do you see the current negotiations as a demonstration of weakness?
Absolutely.
You know,
Unquestionably.
It's interesting that
I'm sorry, excuse me, Brett. If I were on the other side, I'd say it's nothing but weakness. Everything that we've said about it, we want to wipe Israel off the map, blah, 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 blah. By the way, it's a religious issue. You know, Ahmadinejad believed that as a Muslim, and I don't know the difference between the Shia and the Sunnis, that there is something called the hidden imam, who's supposed to be their Messiah, or the 12th imam, he's alternately called. So he believes if he comes, and I think you got to kill all the Jews first before the hidden imam shows up. That's their belief. And so he wants to kill all the Jews, so he'll be the man responsible for bringing back the hidden imam. So it's a religious issue, at least in his mind. He was a radical. He was part of the people that in 1979, the Iranian group who took the hostages out of the U.S. Embassy. And I mean, he's just a plain embedded radical. So I wouldn't trust him not as far as I could throw him, just wouldn't trust him at all under any circumstances.
well, I was just going to say that the advice that
First of all, do you agree with what Sheldon said?
98%.
Is this payback for what he said about your column?
I don't know, your interpretation. In 1986, Rouhani was caught on tape offering advice to a person he believed was a US administration official but turned out to be an Israeli agent on how to negotiate with Iran. And he said, you guys want your hostages freed? He was talking about the American hostages in Lebanon. You need to show strength. You need to show that you're prepared to take military action and you'll get your hostages free. The whole purpose of Rouhani's speech to this Israeli agent was to say, Khomeini only answers to demonstrations of strength. What do we know about the Iranian nuclear program? We know that there was 1 year in which they suspended their program. Miraculously, that year was 2003, when a large American army of 150,000 troops drove all the way to Baghdad and made it appear that the United States was very serious about dealing with rogue regimes that it believed had weapons of mass destruction. That was the 1 year in which they suspended their nuclear program. I want to make just one ancillary point that, in a sense, touches on what you've just said, but it's important because I suspect there are people here who want to paint what's going on the stage as this demonstration of insane right-wing craziness. You know, you want to bomb Iran, you're warmongers, et cetera, okay? I want these people, whoever you are in the audience, to think of this. a regime that is capable of taking a stone in one hand and stoning a woman to death, a regime that hangs gay people from cranes in the streets of Tehran, should not, under any circumstances, get anywhere near a nuclear bomb so they can do likewise to other people. The people who keep saying we need to conciliate with Iran, we need to find a modus vivendi with them, we need to meet them halfway, okay, are objectively fellow traveling with one of the most repressive regimes in the world today. And by the way, when you ask about Rouhani, whatever he is now, he's a moderate, he's not such a moderate, he has been a fellow traveler, in fact, a senior member of a regime that has done more harm and caused more mayhem to its own with its own people and to other people, not the least of whom are Jews, for 34 years. So people who go out and say, oh, those crazy right-wingers are warmongers against Iran, okay, we need to find peace with Iran. You're finding peace with a regime that is the #1 repressor of women, of gay people, of religious minorities, of Jews, and so on. If you call yourself a liberal under those circumstances, you need to re-examine what your liberalism is all about.
Oh. Brett, I now want you to tell us what you really think about Iran.
I haven't started.
I don't want you, I feel you're holding back a little bit, and you told me you would not do that tonight. You said that you would speak candidly. And by the way, it's not just all the groups that you just mentioned, it's the Iranian people themselves. They're the ones that were murdered in the streets in the summer of 2009 when they simply wanted to demonstrate peacefully against Ahmadinejad, and they were slaughtered before the eyes of the world. It took our government a week to even condemn those murders that were tweeted and sent on Facebook throughout the world. Okay, we've talked about the existential threat. We will return to it, but there's two threats facing the Jewish people, as we mentioned. One, of course, is the threat from Iran, which the world is somewhat focused on, maybe not enough. I'm very grateful to you, Brett, for writing today in the Wall Street Journal about all the our innocent Arab brothers and sisters who are being murdered in the streets of Iraq daily. Suicide bombings of 75, 100 by Al-Qaeda that no one even cares about, and there's no mention of it. You were the first to really talk about it just today, and that shows your commitment to human life, and I salute you. But the spiritual threat can lead to the same kind of devastation. We in the United States, we American Jews, don't seem to need a Rouhani bomb to devastate us. We seem to be doing a very fine job of it ourselves, thank you very much. The Pew Research study that I just cited was absolutely devastating. It was really the saddest thing that I had ever read about American Jewry. I couldn't believe the numbers. The disinterest about being Jewish, the lack of Jewish pride, the lack of connection to the state of Israel. Yes, birthright is changing these things, Sheldon, but really the numbers were catastrophic. That 70% of Jews just have no affiliation with anything Jewish. 70%. I mean, Sheldon, you just said that when the gates of the ghetto opened and Jews were allowed to participate fully in mainstream society, they opted out. They chose not to be affiliated. That freedom has been a curse to us in terms of Jewish identity, because when the non-Jews hated our guts and didn't let us marry their daughters and locked us literally in the Venice ghetto, you see the bolts, they would lock them in at night. You had no choice but to remain Jewish. That's why Spinoza said that anti-Semitism was essential to Jewish identity. Sartre, the existentialist, said the exact same thing. So are you really saying that assimilation is being caused by American freedoms?
I don't understand that. Assimilation is being caused by American freedoms? The decisions for the life that a person is going to lead is not made in high school. It's made further on in life. When they have more exposure, they mature on their own, and then they're in a position to make better decisions. That's why I'm saying I agree with you. It occurs on the campus.
Right. It happens later. Okay. And part of it is this open society. And so the question is, what do we do to instill Jewishness with people so that they choose Jewish even though they have options to choose something else?
Well, birthright has been such a proven commodity.
In instilling Jewish identity.
In instilling Jewish identity. whether or not they light candles every Friday night, whether or not they're Shomer Shabbat. And it does create Jewish identity.
The challenge.
We have to keep that going.
But you also said that you don't see any future of the community that isn't Orthodox, meaning that the Pew Research study seems to be showing that the Orthodox are going to survive. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I hope that's not true. We don't want to see only the Orthodox survive. We want every Jew to be...
Unless something is done about it.
Okay, so the question I wanted to ask, therefore, to all of the panelists in a moment is, I say in a moment because I want to put something to bread, but can there be Jewish identity without Jewish religion? You said maybe without Shabbos candles, can there be Jewish identity without the Jewish religion is the main question. Or has that experiment been tried, and that's what the Pew Research study is showing, that that's a failure. You cannot have Jewish continuity without the Jewish religion. Keep that in mind just for a moment, but before that, I want to put something to you about what Sheldon just said about his new attempt for Hasbara to explain Israel. Brett, you write for the Wall Street Journal, you're a defender of Israel. How is it possible that a democracy in the Middle East, 7 million Jewish strong, 6 million Jewish strong, 1.5 million Arab citizens, full citizens. Yes, there is Judea and Samaria, the West Bank dispute going on, but how is it possible that that democracy that treats women as absolute equals, that had a female prime minister, that has Arab MKs, that has an Arab on the Supreme Court, how has Israel's opponents successfully demonstrated to the world, I mean, fraudulently, but successfully in people's minds, that Israel's the aggressor, that Israel is persecuting people, that Israel's the bad guy? How did we lose that public relations battle? How could that have happened?
Well, the short answer is the combination of envy being the most powerful emotion in the world, and on the one side, and on the other side, a kind of mysterious and neurotic Jewish guilt that wants to in some ways placate that envy by acknowledging some kind of guilt. This is what explains this Jewish obsession with trying to, quote, atone for this or that Israeli action in its history. I mean, who are the most vociferous critics of Israel in the world today? And among the most articulate, I'm sorry to say, are many Jews who are seized with this neurosis. I think it's the only thing I can, the only way I can describe it. Look, I was reflecting on a few things Sheldon was saying about his new Hasbara effort, which is, I think, impressive and commendable. But you're never going to win over Israel's enemies by showing how excellent Israel is, or Israel's critics. You're going to enrage Israel's critics by showing them the excellence of the state of Israel. People foam at the mouth. I mean, if Israel were some nothing country in the middle of nowhere, no one would give a damn about Israel, okay? It's Israel's success which inspires this fanatical hatred that these people, the most despised people in the world, the most despised people in the shtetls of Europe, or throughout the Arab or Muslim Middle East, that they should have risen the way they have and succeeded the way they have. We are not going to win a Hasbara battle against our adversaries. This is where we're going to win a Hasbara battle, by winning over our potential friends. First within the Jewish community, but beyond the Jewish community. Just a brief story.
The enemies are lost.
Of course the enemies are lost. I mean, you know, what can you say? Oh, we win all these Nobel Prizes, we cure polio, we're really sorry about the West Bank situation, you know, this is, you know, Jews will not win with conspicuous displays of Woody Allen-esque existential anxiety. But this is what we can do. I'll tell a quick story. Some people have heard me tell the story before, but it made such an indelible impression on me. I went to go give a speech at some synagogue in Cleveland. And there's a typical synagogue crowd, middle-aged, older Jews. And then there's this one young Chinese woman. She comes up, introduces herself. She's from Shanghai. I said, well, you know, what do you do? She said she was an MBA student in Case Western, I think. And I said, oh, so what brings you here, other than shopping for Jewish husband? And she said, this was her answer. I'll never forget. She said, we Chinese people know Jews are the smartest people in the world. And I was like, oh, come on. I mean, you know, there are lots of smart people, lots of smart Chinese people, you know, smart people everywhere. And she looked at me and she said, no, Jews, smartest people in the world. And then I can swear, I mean, this might be an invention of memory, but I think she literally poked her finger in my chest and she said, Jewish people, Nobel Prize in Physics, 36%. Nobel Prize in Economics, 58%. It was some, I forgot the figures, but they're just sort of mind-boggling and astonishing. And she was saying something quite interesting. She was telling me that, and she said, by the way, this is something all Chinese people, she claimed, know. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, okay? This is just an anecdote, okay? But what she was saying is, this is a commonly held belief among, 1.3 billion people in this rising country. What are we doing to win over Chinese to think, hey, Israel, Jews, terrific people, be our friends? We are doing basically nothing, okay? Maybe there's a synagogue, Kaifeng Jews, Shanghai Revival, basically zilch.
So what should we do?
Okay? We should be reaching out not to the campuses at Columbia and saying, oh, you know, we're not as obnoxious as you think, not to our enemies. We should be going to places where we can find potential friends, whether it's in Beijing or New Delhi or flyover country America and Nebraska, where people aren't arriving on campus with these prejudices about how Israel is this apartheid colonial oppressor state, et cetera, et cetera. That's the strategy. Forget the enemies, win over the people who are inclined to be your friends. I would make one small point now on assimilation, which is related to the philanthropic issue, and it's this. Okay, is Judaism an open enrollment university? Because City College tried that in the 60s and 70s, and its reputation plummeted. No, we happen to be an elite university, so to some extent, this anxiety about declining numbers is misplaced. You asked about Jews and religion and identity. So long as there's Israel, okay, super secular Jews like me will have a locus of pride and affinity. And that's one of the reasons why Israel is so important to the rest of the Jewish assimilating world. But the point I want to make is this. Where we need to be sure we are doing our utmost is ensuring Jewish excellence, not Jewish numbers. Okay, numbers and excellence are very different things. And one of the most concerning pieces of news, you talked about the Pew Survey. I don't care about the Pew Survey. What I care about is that 2 Israelis won the Nobel Prize just a couple weeks ago, and where are they? They're at Stanford and at USC. How do you make sure that those Israelis and the brightest Jewish minds in chemistry, in physics, in medicine are finding Israel the best place to forge their careers and make their reputations and win their Nobel Prizes? I think that's really the challenge, making sure that whatever the numbers are, the Jewish people are always associated with the best in the world.
So to stem the Israeli brain drain. Okay. Well, Richard, as I turn to you, let me just dispute some of the points that Brett made, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this. First of all, I disagree with you, Brett. To give up on the universities, to give up on Columbia, to give up on Harvard, to assume that these elite places of academics that produce the world's op-ed writers like yourself, you went to the University of Chicago, that produce the world's authors and the world's broadcasters, to give up on them. By the way, that's not the model that we chose at Oxford. At Oxford, the model we chose was we were going to fight back, that we could win arguments in the marketplace of ideas, that we needed articulate spokespeople. Cory Booker just won a Senate seat last week. He's one of the best friends that Israel has now, that we'll have in the United States Senate, because at Oxford he discovered an organization that was very pro-Israel, but that also was pro-Jewish, and he was a non-Jew who became a lover of the Jewish people. We could have more people like that. To give up on the universities, these are the people who are the influencers. You're going to end up losing all the influence. These are the people who sit on your editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. So, of course we need to reach out to others, but I can't imagine you really mean that we're supposed to just write them up. But just before that, I must bring in Professor Joel here, because at Hillel, wasn't that your model? You didn't give up on the universities. You believed that something could be done to fight for Israel, and can we have a Jewish identity without a Jewish religion? At Hillel, were you trying to get people to keep basic mitzvos as well, or was it Jewish culture you were trying to promote?
Can't have a Jewish identity without a Jewish story, and if you think that by simply saying that Israel is a great bastion, it'll work for this generation and the next one, but not after. The greatness of birthright is not just that it strengthens the Jews' connection to Israel and the Jews' connection to his or her own story, But the great challenge, as yet unfulfilled, is when those young people come back from birthright, we haven't yet figured out how to launch them on their Jewish journey. But I was also very taken when you talked, Sheldon, about nobility. Because 10 years ago, I stood on this stage when I was inaugurated as president, and I said that in my mind, the purpose of education is to ennoble and enable. It's not just the transfer of information, which more and more is what happens on American university campuses. It's also instilling in young people a sense of who they are, where they've come from, what their history is, and what their destiny is. And history and destiny is not about, God forbid, genes, and it's not about achievements, and it's not about Nobel Prizes. I'm not sure. I know for me it's about religion. I don't think the way we build the future is about religion. It's about our children knowing the Jewish story. And you'll let me tell one story. And I told this to some people in Riverdale last night, and a few of them are here, so you'll forgive me. Years ago, I was giving a lecture on Jewish identity in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was using one of the lines that some of us who would go on this routine would do. And in talking to them about Jewish identity, I said, how many people, about 500 people in the room, I said, how many people in this room can tell me the name of Jesus' mother? They kind of nodded like this. I said, and how many people in this room can tell me the name of Moses' mother? And now there was a knowing look. And I went on to talk about how can we possibly keep our story going. I said, Avram benefited from assimilation. He was welcomed in this community, but he was ger v'toshav, right? He was a part of the community and apart from the community. And that's what makes Judaism, as you say, somewhat elite, because you got to struggle with that. After the lecture, a guy comes over to me and says, Mr. Joel, you were terrific. My name is Schindler. I'm originally from Brooklyn. I said, I'm Joel. I'm originally from Yonkers. He says, you were great. I agree with everything you say, but I need you to know I'm different than all those people. I said, you are? He says, yeah. He says, I know her name. I said, you do? He said, yeah. And he smiled. He said, it's Yoshabel. Well, it's not Yoshabel, it's Yocheved. But the poor guy had the bad mazel to be speaking to one of the few idiot savants who knows the only time where Moshe's mother's name is mistranslated as Yoshabel. You know where? Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments. He saw the movie, he didn't read the book. There is something about, and I'm not talking religion, I'm talking about the Jewish story. And it's thank God it happens on college, but they can't go to college thinking that there's nothing, because they'll join the nothingness of college. It's about vibrant Jewish communities. As Orthodox, we have a responsibility to know who we are, but know that we're part of a larger people, and that we're part of American society, and we need to take a major role. But we also have a responsibility to do what the Adelsons are doing, to look at different aspects of Jewish life and say, how do we push here? How do we push there? How do we push there? And then we get to where Brett is. That it's never about the numbers. It's never about the numbers. It's whether there are critical masses with passion and purpose, with nobility to be able to carry our story forward. So we're not just historical, we're a people of destiny. And that's the job.
Okay, this is.
Can I just
wait just a second. This is really getting interesting because I'm getting so angry that I feel like throwing something right now. I respectfully. It's rare that I disagree with Brett, and especially with President Joel, who's one of the great American Jewish leaders.
No, I'm in trouble.
But I really can't believe what I'm hearing. It's not about numbers. The whole reason Israel has no support is that there's 2 Jews in the whole world. It's not about numbers. St. Paul comes and takes the best ideas of Judaism, markets it as a new religion in Christianity. I mean, Sheldon, you're a businessman. Is that smart business to allow all your intellectual property to be taken, turned into a competitor that even begins to persecute you? Of course it's about numbers. Paul did what we should have done a long time ago. He took the essence of Judaism and he spread it to the world. Why are we elitist? Why are we proud of being elitist? There are not enough Jews in the world. The numbers are frightening. And Brett, to say that Israel is going to be enough of a locus of connection for secular Jews, that has been disproven already. We've now seen that I'm a Zionist. but I'm a Zionist that knows that Judaism is the essence of our love for Israel. Because secular Zionism is largely regarded as having failed. 1.5 million Israelis have left Israel already. Today, 60% of the officer corps in the IDF is religious with a yarmulke. At Oxford, we saw the anti-Israel movement begin in 1988. I guess because Arafat was then mainstreamed, he had recognized Israel. Suddenly, the Oxford Union was inviting pro-Palestinian speakers, and our response was that we could really win this. They brought Hanan Ashrawi. She started cutting her teeth at Oxford debates. We felt that we could engage those debates and win arguments in the marketplace of ideas. And people like Ron Dermer, who were our students, who just became Israel's ambassador to the United States, they gained their first real skills in fighting Israel's battles in those debates at Oxford. I don't care if it's Dade County Community College, near where I grew up in Miami, or if it's Oxford University. You have to engage and believe you can win. I don't want to write these people off. That's my main point. But Sheldon, you wanted to make a point. We're coming to the end in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Sheldon.
I'd say he made a point that the scientists are going back to Israel to achieve their scientific, to ride up to the scientific pinnacle. It's just the opposite. Mary and I have a not very well known, but very effective medical research foundation. We've created a collaborative way of conducting medical research that has fundamentally changed the way medical research is conducted. Not according to us, according to the scientists. At our peak, we supported 200 scientists in 70 different institutions.
In Israel?
No, all over the world. But we have maybe 6 or 8 in Israel, Weizmann, Technion, Hadassah. We study 6 or 7 cancers, a couple of neurological issues. We don't publicize it very much, but we laid back during the recession, and now the last couple of years, we picked it up again. In the last 3 years, we have published 445 scientific papers, collaboratively. So I want to tell you, this was a big subject. We about quarterly, we bring 1,500 scientists in, and we just had a group of scientists in a couple of weeks ago. These are the tops of the top. In all the cancers, one of our scientists who runs a cancer program discovered Herceptin, the medication that treats 25% of women with breast cancer. But anyway, what I want to tell you is here's the reason why we can't keep scientists in Israel. And we had a lot of scientists in Israel talking about it there. The reason is there's no such thing as the NIH over there. The National Institutes of Health, that is a government funded, they fund about 30 billion in doing their own research. This is like the United States Hospital and the United States Research Group. We even finance some of the programs at the NIH and the NCI, the National Cancer Institute. The problem is there's no NIH there. So people who want to study can't get grants. They can't get grants, so they come over to the States where they can get grants. So the magnetism is pulling in this direction, not going in the Israeli direction. That's the reason why they're not there.
Got to do a column about that. Okay.
I could put you in touch with 1 or 2 Nobel Prize winners. One of them is somebody we support up at Technion. Nobel Prize winner. They just don't have the money to support the scientists. Yeah. So these guys that are walking brains with MDs, PhDs, or multiple PhDs, they don't get money to conduct their research in Israel, so they have to come to where the money is. This is like, who's that bank robber?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you rob banks? Oh.
That's where the money is.
Yeah, Willie Sutton. Why do you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. So why did they move to the States? Because that's where the money is.
Okay. We started by discussing the existential threat to Israel from Iran. Well, every life has a body and a soul, so we discussed the existential threat to the body. Then we went to the soul, assimilation. And I want to put the last question to each of the panelists, giving short responses, please, back to the existential threat so that we close the circle. Prime Minister Netanyahu will be in Rome tomorrow for meetings with John Kerry. It is widely believed that President Obama would like to see a peace deal before he leaves office. He has stated as much. He won a Nobel Peace Prize already. Many people feel he feels he has to earn the Nobel Peace Prize. What better way than Israel? I mean, that's perhaps my interpretation and that of others on it. But there could be a lot of pressure on Israel to cede land for peace. And I just spent the last 3 days visiting communities in Judea, Samaria. I met widows of the IDF, a very moving trip. Anyway, I was sending you some of the pictures of the women that I was meeting who lost their husbands fighting gallantly for Israel in places like Gaza. So to each of the participants, given that Israel is probably going to face a lot of pressure to cede land for peace, and let me begin with you, Brett, and then go to Sheldon, and then go to Richard. You originally supported the Gaza withdrawal, but you later repudiated that support, which was a very brave thing for someone to do, to actually repudiate his own position. I've rarely seen that in print. Should Israel trade land for peace? Should Bibi succumb to undoubtedly a lot of pressure that's going to come his way?
Well, right. I mean, when you stake a position and it's demonstrated to be wrong, you should recant the position. Look, the most that I can say...
Why were you wrong on Gaza?
Well, the most that I can say is that if Gaza was supposed to be a test case for what a Palestinian state might look like, it was one hell of a test case. The first thing that happened, it was the destruction of the economic assets that Israel and Jim Wolfenson had labored to maintain in place, so that Gaza might have been a showcase of what a Palestinian state might be. People say, oh, it's so small, it's so crowded. A, it's not crowded. Anyone who's actually been to Gaza, as I have, knows it's not crowded. And B, what's wrong with small? Hong Kong is small, Singapore is small, Macau is small. These places thrive. So what you saw in Gaza was what a Palestinian state would look like. First a civil war, then Hamas takeover, an entrepot for global terror, a threat not just to Israel, but a threat also to its other forgotten neighbor, Egypt, to its south, a hotbed for fanaticism, a place where women are repressed, can't run in marathons because they might have to wear running shorts, and so on. So you have to sort of accept the evidence of experience. I've often said I'm in favor of a two-state solution, provided the state on the other side of the border is Canada. Okay?
Is what?
Is Canada. Is Canada.
And I mean this very seriously to people who say, oh, pro-Palestinian people, like, I say this and they say, oh, that's ridiculous. And what they're saying is, it's ridiculous to expect that Palestinians should be expected to behave like Canadians. That is, peaceable, funny accents, odd sporting habits, but basically, good people, right? And they say, oh, that's horrible. How can you say that? No, it's horrible of the so-called pro-Palestinians to just write off the Palestinians as a people who are totally incapable of liberal, democratic, peaceable, tolerant, pluralistic government. So by all means, I go back to the 1967 lines. If the 1967 lines are the 49th parallel, I have no objection to that. But if all we're doing is midwifing into existence another fanatical, failed, dysfunctional state committed not to building up its own institutions, but committed entirely to the destruction of its neighbors, plural, Jordan, Egypt, as well as Israel, then I think it's an insanity to support this kind of state. Let's do the Palestinians the honor of saying, we expect, the international community knows that there are Kurds who wish they had a state, and there are Tamils who wish they had a state, and there are Tibetans who wish they had a state. There are many stateless people, okay? And the world being what it is, we expect you to demonstrate your worthiness and your readiness to have a state. Because you know what? When you look at all the post-colonial experiments from 1947 onwards, there's about one success story. One state that emerged as a little third world country with few natural resources and ended up being this wildly successful first world country. That's Israel. Let's say to the Palestinians, we look forward to when to where your faculty produces more than so-called engineers who are experts in explosives. Show us what you can produce in terms of agriculture, in terms of genuine human rights, in terms of theater, the arts, respect for culture, respect for antiquities. And by the way, am I saying anything outrageous? I'm not. But there are a few people in this audience who are going, oh my God, it's outrageous. No, people are not born with a natural, immediate right to self-determination. They have to demonstrate that right. That is the reality of politics and history. So let us say to the Palestinians, by all means, prove to us you want to earn the right to have a state that will make you, as Palestinians and the rest of the world, proud.
Okay. You said there's
That's a
people,
short answer.
No, you said there's people in the audience that feel that way. You're actually going to see it on some of the websites that are going to follow this discussion, because some of the people who are here in the audience are very much they cover our events. But I insisted, because I believe in freedom of the press, that they be allowed to enter. No doubt I know what their take's going to be on it, but we believe in freedom of the press. That's the way it should be. I believe that Israel and the Jewish people can win arguments in the marketplace of ideas. That's what Israel represents. It's an open democracy, and that's what we always practice. Sheldon, should Israel be prepared to trade land for peace?
I think it's it's unwise to trade land for peace as it is to trust uranium. It's more unwise to trade land for peace from a people who are not a people. You cannot find a serious book covering history that uses the word Palestinian referring to a people prior to, I'll take a round point in time, the Second World War. The Palestinian people were not created until the PLO was created in 1964. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. Do you know what they are? The Palestinians call themselves Southern Syrians. They're the Syrians that were left over from the district of Syria that was so named in the Ottoman Empire. When France was sent in by the League of Nations and Britain was sent in by the League of Nations to break up those areas and to demarcate the borders, they put in Syria, the French put in Syria and Lebanon, and south of there, the Arabs that lived there, the Syrians, were left over because they lived in Palestine. Now, I'm saying Palestine, it was south of Syria. So they called themselves Southern Syrians. Now, I was just given a book last night by a Joan Peters, who wrote a book that cut short my hope to commission a scholarly study about the Southern Syrians and who make up the Arabs. Mark Twain in the 1800s went from Jerusalem to Haifa, and he said he hardly saw anybody except goats and sheep and Bedouin. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. They have fooled the world very successfully. I don't like Arafat. I don't like what he stood for. He stood for the destruction of the Jewish people. Give them a state by which they're going to say, oh, we're not going to be demilitarized, and compromise with them. Oh, here's a good compromise, somebody could say. You want to kill, you say to I can imagine a meeting between an Israeli Jew and the Muslims. Muslims, you want to kill 100% of the Jews. We don't want you to kill anybody, so let's compromise. We'll surrender half of the Jews so you could kill them, and then the other half of the Jews will stay alive, and both of us get a compromise. Can't get everything we want, but we get some of what we want. It's ridiculous. These people espouse the destruction of the Jewish people worldwide in the state of Israel. When they talk about the little Satan and the big Satan, this is not colloquy. This is not conjecture. They really mean it. In their culture and their religion, There's a big difference. Why do you say the men who become martyrs go to heaven and they meet up with 72 virgins? I can never figure out what the virgins did to deserve that. But they do distinguish between heaven and hell. Hell, to them, they really believe in it. So America is the great Satan because it's a larger country, and Israel is the little Satan. So they get rid of one, they're going after the other. Nobody believes him. Nobody believes Hillel Cook when he came to this country and tried to convince Roosevelt that millions of Jews were being gassed. Nobody believed him. So nobody believes that what they have in mind. So I think to go and allow a Palestinian state is like playing Russian roulette with yourself. Because one day the bullet's going to come out and it's going to kill you. So I wouldn't consider that. They hate us. They don't want us alive. If they really wanted peace, somewhere, somehow, in the last 65 years, they would have moved 1 millimeter toward the Jewish demands. They're always saying, well, we want, you got to show a confidence-building measure. That's a lot of baloney. Why don't they show confidence-building measure? As I said earlier, all you got to do is not have terrorism for 5 or 10 years, and you convince the Jews you're going to be peaceful. This is not an issue about a grievance. Like the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor because in the Second World War, the United States cut off the flow of oil to Japan to punish them for attacking and taking over China. This is not a territorial issue. The Arabs have 500 times more land than Israel has. And by the way, the biblical Israel, or Palestine, was Israel plus Jordan. So I don't understand why we're listening to these guys and we feel compelled to say, talk about a two-state solution. For what?
So you're opposed to land for peace. And finally, Richard.
Yeah.
How often are you asked this question?
How often do I answer it? First of all, I mean, I think there's been incredibly cogent comments by two esteemed colleagues, but I'll only make 2 comments. One is, I can't find a place where a country has an obligation to commit suicide. You know, that's the bottom line. Number 2, I'm going to be a little unpopular now in terms of a 2-state solution. I think we have passionate discussions among ourselves. I think we need to be supportive of the state of Israel in every way. I think the decisions, ultimately, the decisions about negotiations and peace are the proper province of the people who live in the state of Israel. And I think we can talk among ourselves. But until I move there, I want to be supportive of the government of Israel, and I want the government of Israel to direct its own future.
Fair answer. Well, I have 3 kids there now, thank God, so I hope that counts for having some say, but I agree with you, not nearly as much as anyone who lives there and defends the country, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in this very spirited conversation. Wait. We have a vote of thanks from Ken Abramowitz. Ken is a supporter of many of these live events. These live events are critical to fostering a values-based conversation from the perspective of the Jewish people. And Ken will do the vote of thanks. Thank you, Ken. Just give us 1 moment, please, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to thank the speakers for being very candid and for having a free... Someone lost a wedding ring? Did someone lose a wedding ring? Really? Mort
Klein's wife threw away his wedding ring.
Everyone, please show respect for us to end this event properly with our vote of thanks from Ken Abramowitz, who helps us put on these events. Thank you. Ken, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Shmuley. I just wanted, in 5 minutes, I wanted to mention 3 quick things. Number one, I want to thank you, Shmuley, for organizing this at very short notice. You're doing a great job. Keep doing it. President Joel, thank you for hosting us here. Very gracious of you. Sheldon and Miriam, thanks for all that you do for the Jewish people and for world business. And Brett Stevens, as a professional analyst, I always look at other analysts to see how much they agree with me or I agree with them, and you come pretty close in the 98-99 category, so keep it up.